This one. How does it look? Hey, don't catch my window, no? Oh yeah. It's all good, no? But the screen doesn't look full, no? But, no. Why screen like this? I need to check. Does the screen look good? I want to check a couple of things so everything would be much better, you know? Without any issues, you know? Yeah, it looks okay. Why I thought it's not okay. Everything is good. Okay, let's see this video.
In May of 1921, after a sudden illness, a man named Paul Amadeus Dinock slipped into a mysterious coma that lasted an entire year. But as bizarre as this sounds, it wasn't the strangest thing that happened to Dinock. When the young Swiss teacher finally came to, not only was he perfectly fine, but he also seemed to have acquired a supernatural ability to predict the future. I know this sounds so left field, but frankly, Dinock's revelations after coming back from his coma are things that simply cannot be accounted for any other way. He spoke of things like a handheld box that brings pictures to life, in other words, an iPad. He also predicted quite a number of things that would happen a full century later, like our attempts to colonize Mars, and even nuclear wars. And this was all at a time when World War II hadn't even happened yet. If you don't believe in the paranormal, then the story I'm about to tell you might just shatter your worldview, so brace yourself. And if you do believe, well, you're gonna want to hear this. Paul Amadeus Dinock was a Swiss-Austrian teacher born in Zurich with a deep passion for history and classical philology, that is, the study of the history of language. For the most part, Dinock's health was quite fragile, but even that couldn't explain the strange sleep he fell into one day. That fateful day, Dinock was going about his regular activities when he suddenly fell into a strange sleep, just like...
Wait, I checked something. I need to fix my camera, I think. Looks like shit. Wait. The camera angle, it's not good. Let's do this side. Yeah, I think much better. Oh, my cat came. It's not paranormal activity, it's just my cat. This is way better, no? Alright, put on the corner. The corner view is much better, I think so. Oh shit. I almost fucked my screen. Fuck. Fuck's sake. If I would squeeze harder, I would fuck my screen.
Like that. Startled, his friends and family try waking him up from this strange and sudden sleep, but nothing they do rouses Dinock. This freaks everyone out, so they quickly rush him to the hospital, where the doctor informs them that Dinock had slipped into a coma, even though upon physical examination, he couldn't exactly find anything wrong with him. For 14 days, Dinock remains in this coma-like sleep until he finally wakes up, much to the relief of his panic-stricken mother. Naturally, Dinock feels a bit disoriented, but other than that, he seems completely fine, and after a couple of weeks, he goes back to his normal life. Perhaps this was just one of those random weird things that happens to people every once in a while, right? Well, not for Dinock it wasn't, because 4 years later, in May of 1921, Dinock would once again fall into this strange sleep. Only this time, it was after a brief illness. Just like the last time, his friends and family would try to wake him, and just like the last time, nothing they try works. So once again, they rushed Dinock to the hospital, perhaps expecting that he would come to in a few days or weeks, just like he did the last time. Dinock doesn't. Month after month goes by, and Dinock is still unconscious. His mother even passes on
wonder
while
who
waiting
make
for him
that.
to come out of this strange
Who
coma.
makes him
But
to be
Dinok
unconscious,
just never
you know?
wakes up.
To get him in the
Then
coma.
one day in May of 1922, a full year after he slipped into his second coma, Dinok blinks and comes to. He's awake. Dinok's post-coma recovery is
I
once
never
again
heard of this
phenomenal.
story.
Sure, his muscles are weak from a whole year of non-use, but besides that, he
That's
seems
why I love
perfectly
YouTube.
okay.
You can get anything.
There's just
in
one
here.
thing though. Post-coma Dinok seems off.
And I was
He's not-
checking about this guy, and he was real stuff, like real thing, you know. I was checking on YouTube.
Talking to his
I
friends
mean on
or his
Google.
family or anyone. He's being cagey, and it just feels like he's hiding something. Could this be grief? He and his mother had a very close relationship, so waking up from his coma to hear that his mom died waiting for him must have broken him.
Yeah.
Still, this seems to be a little more than
That's
grief.
fucked. You know,
Dinok is
it's
gradually
like
becoming a
hard,
recluse, burying himself in manual labor during the day and spending his evenings with his nose buried in books about philosophy. The only person he speaks to now is his priest, which makes the situation even weirder, because before the coma, Dinok wasn't exactly what you would call a very religious person. In fact, he was gradually starting to become skeptical
Basically,
about
he
religion.
was like
But then,
in
after his
another
coma,
realm or something?
Dinok suddenly becomes very
Parallel
invested in
universe or
religious and spiritual matters, talking to his priest all the time, and even suggesting to him that there was a whole lot about religion and the afterlife that the priest didn't know about. What those things were, though, Dinok wouldn't say. Anyway, a couple of months pass by after Dinok's strange coma episode, and he comes down with a bad case of tuberculosis. For months, the disease would persist and worsen until Dinok's doctors advised him to move to a more temperate city. This was in October of 1922.
tempered.
With no mother and no friends, Dinok probably
he
feels
get
like he
better
no
doctors
longer
or
has
what?
any ties to Zurich
I
anyway.
need to do
So he
something
picks
with
up
my
his
chair.
belongings
It's
and
always
moves to
squeaking,
Athens
you know?
in Greece,
Squeaky
where he gets a
noises.
job teaching French and German. Initially, the change of scenery seems great for Dinok, but it doesn't take long before the people of the city start to notice that something is off about this man. For instance, one of these days, Dinok is sitting in front of the Parthenon, the ruins of an ancient temple built in honor of the Greek goddess Athena. While there, a young man comes to sit beside him and makes a passing comment about how someone 2,000 years ago probably sat at the same spot where they were sitting, looking at the rock, and that if they focused only on the rock and nothing else, it could almost be like they had traveled back in time to that era, 2,000 years ago. Dinok immediately agrees with the young man's theory, but then, putting his own spin on it, Dinok adds that since the Parthenon would still be the same in 2,000 years, staring at it and forgetting everything else, it could also be like they had traveled forward in time. But then, he adds one thing that totally freaks his new friend out. After saying that the Parthenon would remain the same in 2,000 years, he says, "Except then, there will be no bars around it. They will have gotten rid of them." The seriousness and sense of absolute certainty that Dinok has around him proves too much for his new friend, so the young man awkwardly walks away from Dinok. Very likely it wasn't just this young man who found Dinok weird in Athens, but there was one man who didn't. One man who admired and respected Dinok a lot. His name was George Papahatsis, and he was a student of Dinok's. Over time, Dinok and Papahatsis would get closer and closer, and Dinok would share his life with his beloved student, except for one thing.
I'm watching the
his
video.
mysterious coma experience.
I see from a window and
Well,
somebody
it probably
watching me
didn't matter
from a
because
street.
Dinok
What
was
the
about
fuck?
to have bigger issues anyway.
That
In
was so
April of
strange.
1923,
Hey,
6
I
months.
just wanna check how is the sound. Just wanna see, you know. Does the sound is good? Like. Vienas du. Oh, the sound is very good. But I wanna see how is the sound with the video. The sound is very good.
Months after
But
moving
I
to
wanna
Greece,
see how is the
Dinok's
sound
tuberculosis symptoms started to worsen significantly.
One to.
At this point, Dinok is coughing a lot more than usual, and he can tell that he's not
Be
going to
honest,
be
be honest.
around for much longer. So, he begins to put his house in order.
Maybe I gonna maybe put little lower sound. Yeah, it's okay.
Order. The only unresolved issue
Nobody
left
wants to
being
watch
his
with
coma
me. Nothing.
experience.
Oh my god.
As
I
days
don't
turn
know.
into weeks and weeks into months, Dinok battles with whether or not to share his coma experience. Unfortunately,
I
his
put
mind has
subtitles
failed
or
him,
something.
and he can't seem to recall correctly everything that he experienced during the coma. This troubles Dinok a lot, until one day, it all starts coming back to him. All of a sudden, it's like a huge weight has been lifted from his shoulders. Dinok is so happy and excited that even his landlady notices. He sits down to put pen to paper, and over the course of many days, he puts down his coma experience as accurately as he can remember it. What he put down on those pages is what you're about to find out.
Oh, let's see. What he say? What do you say? What is the future?
Paul Amadeus Dinok passed away in 1924, presumably due to tuberculosis. And for 50 years, his name was lost to history, until 1972, when his beloved student, George Papahansis, published a book. This book, it turns out, is a translation of Dinok's old diary, and its contents is a chronicle of everything that happened to Dinok while he was in the second coma.
Looks like nice
Dinok had
book.
entrusted Papahansis with the diary as practice material, so Papahansis could work on his German by translating the content of the diary into Greek. Dinok's only instruction to Papahansis was that he could not publish the content of the diary for any reason. Well, I guess Papahansis kind of fumbled that one, but his defiance is the reason we have this.
I mean, it's
today,
good that he
so
published
maybe there was
because
a silver lining after all. Anyway, as Papahansis begins to translate the diary, he finds some early entries about Dinok's heartbreak when his first love marries another man and dies soon after. The later entries, however, are where things start to get really, really strange. At first, the writing seems a little confusing, almost like Dinok was trying to say something without saying something. But then, as Dinok approaches death, he begins to write
how
much
you
more
can
freely.
understand something in that
Here's how he describes his
writing.
coma experience. Hold on to your seats, because it's about to get wild. According to Dinok, on the first day of his coma, he woke up to a group of people staring down at him in a strange room. Outside of his window was a beautiful countryside with colors of blue and green blended together, and on the wall of his room, a soft pink light bounced off the crystal on the wall, giving the room an otherworldly feel. At first, Dinok begins to wonder if this is heaven, or maybe one of those planets he'd been hearing about with the intelligent alien creatures. But he finally realizes that he's in a hospital, the strangest, most beautiful hospital he's ever been in. For 9 days, Dinok is unable to leave his bed because he's in so much pain, and his mind is fuzzy. But from the 10th day, Dinok finds that he's able to move around a bit. And by the 12th day, just 3 days after he first starts to move around, he feels almost completely fine. A recovery that just...
Hey, does he make these photos from AI or something? Because we look super realistic, like real, you know, like real thing.
astounds, but not as much as his next experience in this strangely beautiful hospital. Now, up to this point, Dinok has had a bandage on his head, even though he can't recall why it's there. So when he looks into a mirror, he doesn't see much, just the bandage.
Yeah, definitely AI.
But then, a few days later, the nurse unwraps his head, and Dinok sees his face in the mirror for the first time. When he does, he crumbles onto the floor, confused as he heads towards the verge of a nervous breakdown. The man staring back at him in terror from the mirror wasn't him. He had never seen this man before in his life. Who was he? Dinok gets so panicked and manic that the nurses are ordered not to go near him. Instead, he is left in the care of two specific physicians, the chief doctor and another doctor.
the
As
hell?
the doctors try to communicate with him, Dinock realizes that he can't make out what language they are speaking, which is odd considering
Man, imagine that, like, they speak maybe English and he is a Greek or something and he like, what the hell?
Dinock's specialty in languages. He does sense that the language has a bit of an Anglo-Scandinavian blend though, but that's all he can make of it, and it really weirds him out. After a few days, Dinock finally calms down and is allowed to take walks around the facility, a place unlike anything he has ever seen in his life. For instance, there's this great hall where everything is made of crystal, and one day Dinock is walking across this hall when he sees a group of doctors and nurses huddled together and chatting. He can't really hear them because they are whispering, and also because of the language barrier, but he can make out a few words here and there. One name that seems to be going around a lot is Andreas Nordum, which Dinock assumes to be the name of the man whose body he was in. The more Dinock listens, the more he's able to get a few more bits and pieces of the puzzle. And from what he gathers, Andreas Nordum had been involved in an accident which killed him, but then the doctors froze his brain for some minutes and were able to revive him. Well, revive in a sense because, as you and Dinock know, even though these people were looking at Andreas Nordum, Nordum had not actually come back to life. Obviously, this sounds absolutely insane, and Dinock realizes it too. So, he decides to play along and not tell anyone the secret about his true identity.
How is that would work? Like, the guy died, and that another guy from the past go to coma, and his conscious just go to that guy, but how? Why? Like, no. It's so many questions. Well, this video, it looks like it's telling from the book and everything. I wonder what comments say. Just check the comments. Predictions are either wrong. Existing dripping. Spirit of a man who possesses video with the biggest deception of all times. What? Okay.
Now, up to this point,
There are
Dinock
always
still
some
thinks he's in
Christians.
1921, but while speaking to one of the doctors, he learns that he's not actually in 1921, but in 3906. This pushes Dinock again into another nervous breakdown, because unless he was the subject of an elaborate prank, not only had he switched bodies, he had also somehow jumped forward in time by 2,000 years in just one night. Dinock's new reality takes a while to sink in. I mean, psychologically, he's in the year 1921, but physically, he finds himself in the year 3906, and it's really conflicting for him. Perhaps it was this mental block, or maybe it was something else, but Dinock found that he could no longer fall asleep. Which is ironic when you consider that he got into this mysterious situation as a result of an illness that caused mysterious sleep. Anyway, shortly after Dinock found out whose body he was in and what year it was, he is taken to meet a group of people called the Lectors. The Lectors are spiritual leaders with a royal and priestly aura to them, and when Dinock sees them, he immediately falls on his face, sobbing and confessing, opening up about his past and the truth of who he really is. The men seem empathetic, but they don't do much to help Dinock except to say some stuff about reality and human cognition that Dinock didn't really get. After meeting the Lectors and confessing his true identity to them, Dinock meets Andreas Nordum's mentor, Jaeger, as well as his best friend, Stefan. The two men teach Dinock a lot of things about the future and introduce him to a box that turns words into pictures and sound so he could learn even more.
What?
Which kinda sounds like our modern day iPad, doesn't it? Anyway, this device, called the Reagan Swage, is what Dinock uses to learn about the past, or our future. Dinock is allowed to learn as much as he wants about all the centuries leading up to 3906, with one exception: he couldn't learn about the 20th century. Jaeger felt that Dinock knowing about a past that he could be in a position to change might be bad for the timeline. By the way, just to clarify, both Jaeger and Stefan knew the truth about Dinock's identity. Now here's what Dinock learned about our future.
So what he learned?
Humans are going to have a very difficult 3 centuries, from 2000 to 2300. During this time, humans will struggle with overpopulation and lots of international conflicts. In the middle of this, we will still continue to record astronomical achievements, and quite literally too, because we colonized Mars in 2024. And for
Yeah,
60 long
sure.
years after that, the human colony
Why
on
he
Mars
write with 2024? He just made the video like 22 hours ago. Why he put what? Claim.
will grow to 22 million. Unfortunately, a massive impact event would hit Mars, wiping out the entire human colony on it. And because of that, humans will not attempt to colonize Mars or any other planet for a very long time.
Trauma.
By 2309, humans will experience a medium-scale war that will last for 80 years.
Oh,
This war will
Russia
annihilate
maybe.
the human population, especially Europe. Only the Baltic and Scandinavian countries will survive, perhaps
What?
explaining why the language in 3906 had
Lithuania?
an Anglo-Scandinavian blend. Anyway, after the nuclear war, by 2396, the human population would be in aggressive decline until a new world government rises up and ends the global war, marking the beginning of a new history for the human race. This new world government will eventually prove to be very corrupt, though, as it will mostly be run by oligarchs. So for 200 years, people will resist this government until it eventually falls and the business of governance is moved to the thinkers, humanitarians, and scientists. Once again, this will mark a new beginning for humanity. Now, following that, for the next 300 years, mankind will undergo a massive societal reform, shifting from a scarcity-based economic system to an adequacy-based system. In other words, people will start working for the greater good rather than working to accumulate wealth. At first, people will work for 40 years and then retire, after which the global community will look after them. But by the time Denoch arrives in 3906 AD, people only have to work for 2 years in a compulsory program called a service. The service begins at age 17 after a person has completed their education and ends at age 19 when they retire and then pursue whatever life they want. Sure, you could work. The man whose body Denoch was in, for instance, was a physicist. But at this point in history, money isn't exactly in use anymore, as people now see value in art and science rather than in material possessions. So
It
as long as
sounds
you
like
complete your service
some
years,
like
you don't need to
fairy
ever
tale.
worry about money again. But what about human greed? Do humans just stop being greedy and develop perfect contentment in 2,000 years? Well, it sounds like we do. According to Denoch's diary, around the year 3000, something called the Nebelberch happens. And this event comes with a new spiritual ability called the Oversen or Supersen. It's an
What's that?
ability that makes it possible for mankind to tap into the vast reservoir of spiritual knowledge. Which sounds great until you find out that everyone who experienced the Nebelberch when it first happened died. The strong rush of emotions proved too much for them, and so their bodies succumbed. In 3382, though, the first
So
man
much emotions
survives
will
the
die.
Nebelberch, and then from then on, everyone starts surviving it, which leads to the evolution of a new species of man called the Homo occidentalis novus, or the New Western Man. Because human nature essentially changes thanks to the Nebelberch.
Hey, but why he not say about AI, nothing about that implants in the brain? Because it's happening as well, you know, and it's not like just something happened and gonna be cancel everything.
There will be no need for laws in the future. Everyone works for the common good, and all the centuries leading up to that enlightenment will be viewed as the Dark Ages. Speaking of human nature, Denoch observed that people of 3906 had a peculiarity about them. They seemed like carefree children, with no single worry in the world, and this made him wonder how they planned to survive if they received an external threat from, say, aliens. Well, as it turns out, they had already met with aliens plenty of times, and the encounters turned out to be quite pleasant. One day, Stefan
Yeah, why we think everyone like are writing here like, oh, a counter with aliens? I think we already like between us or something, and if we would want, we already would destroy us all, you know, but I think that's not how it works, you know.
Decides to take Dinok to a super city called Norfer, which obviously did not exist in 1921 and still does not exist today. According to Dinok's account, Norfer was the fourth largest city in the world, and people described the
What
place
is maybe Dubai? Dubai Brothers City.
as a fairy tale land.
Fairy
In
tale.
that city, Dinok saw many mansions as tall as mountains, a lake shore that was lined with synthetic marble, hanging gardens, floating shops, floating observatories, floating lounges, and vast underground cities. This probably sounds unimpressive to you, being born in a generation where sci-fi movies are a dime a dozen, but keep in mind that Dinok lived in an era where sci-fi movies were hardly a thing. Movies hadn't even started talking in Dinok's time, yet Dinok is mentioning inventions that sound a lot like 3D movies and jumbotrons. Anyway, being highly interested in philosophical matters, Dinok obviously loves his new life in 3906 AD, with the heightened spiritual enlightenment and the deep thinkers he gets to interact with. Then one day, he decides
It would be crazy if he would get this awakening or something and then come back to his old times.
time for him to take a spiritual journey to a place known as the Valley of Roses, the spiritual center of the city, home to the spiritual elite who had dedicated their lives to the study of philosophy and science. Guided by his friend Stefan, Dinok visits the Valley of Roses on a flying boat, and the place is everything you'd imagine it to be. Completely otherworldly, with shimmering lights,
It looks same like,
beautiful
yeah.
flower bushes, magnificent temples and monuments, and precious stones everywhere. Dinok instantly falls in love with this place and spends the next few weeks there. Sadly, the longer Dinok stays there, the more yearnings for his old life start to rush over him, getting stronger and stronger with each passing day. Specifically, Dinok is hit with a strong wave of nostalgia for his first love, Anna, which leads us to another wild experience that Dinok has while in Andreas Nordum's body. For context, as a young man, Dinok met and fell in love with a girl from his village named Anna. Unfortunately, things didn't quite turn out as they'd both hoped, as Anna's family forced her to marry another man, and she even died soon after that. But now,
That's
just
a
before
bad
Anna
story.
got married, on one of those evenings, Anna and Dinok went up a hill to spend one last
Oh.
time together. After sharing a few beautiful hours, Anna decides it's time for them to go back. But just before they leave, Dinok makes Anna promise him that he would see her again. Anna agrees. In fact, she goes further to promise him that the next time they did, she would make a wreath from the windflowers on the hill where they sat, and she'd give it to him to put on her head. Now, here's where it gets crazy. In 3906, as Andreas Nordum, Dinok starts a relationship with a girl named Sylvia. One day, nearly a year after Dinok first wakes up in the future, the two decide to go on a day trip to Dinok's old village, although Sylvia doesn't know that this is where they are going. When they get there, they spend many hours touring the place, and then end up on a hill where they share a picnic. And that's when the most curious thing happens. After spending a couple of hours on the hill, Sylvia decides that it's time to leave, but then she picks up some windflowers, makes them into a wreath, and then gives them to Dinok to place on her head. The simple act throws Dinok aback for a second. This is exactly what Anna promised she'd do the next time they saw each other. Could Anna have switched bodies and time traveled to 3906 too? Did she really not die? Dinok is still pondering this when he gets back from their day trip, so he shares his weird experience with Sylvia with Stefan. In response, Stefan explains that time isn't linear, and that Sylvia was very likely Anna's reincarnated soul that traveled through time to fulfill her promise. Before you scoff, here's something I didn't mention at first. When Dinok first met Sylvia, Stefan had explained to him that Andreas Nordum had been in love with Sylvia since forever, but that Sylvia didn't love him in return. So how come Sylvia, who felt nothing for Nordum before, suddenly started feeling something for him when Dinok's consciousness started living in his body? This has to be evidence for reincarnation, right? Anyway, as Dinok ponders on that realization, he slowly starts to feel drowsy for the first time since he woke up in 3906 AD. How he managed to stay awake for a whole year beats me, but slowly and gently, His eyelids flutter, and then they close, and then he falls asleep. By the time DeNock wakes up, he's back in the 20th century, and back to his old body.
Yeah. How he, became like
Now,
1 year with no sleep.
this story is too incredible to be real. But
Yeah.
hold that sentiment and think about it for just a second. Many of DeNock's predictions turned out to be eerily accurate. I mean, the diary entries talk about how the 21st century would be shaped by agricultural and environmental problems, the rise of individualism, the abolition of human rights, and the very real threat of nuclear weapons. DeNock also mentioned something about colonizing Mars, flying vehicles, holographic technology, and making contact with alien life. You don't need me to tell you that these predictions have turned out to be super accurate so far, especially for a man living in the early 1920s.
I never saw any contact with aliens like in 2024. I mean, didn't read it about it and didn't saw anything.
This was a time before World War II and the consequent boom in scientific research and discovery. In fact, the Manhattan Project, which kickstarted research into the development of nuclear weapons, hadn't even started at that point, and wouldn't start until about 20 years from then. So, Paul shouldn't have known what nuclear weapons are, let alone how they would pose an existential threat to humans in the 21st century. He shouldn't have even had the raw materials in his brain to cook up such fantastic recollections. On the surface of it, at least, there's simply no way else to explain DeNock's predictions, other than that he actually lived in the future like he claimed. Except, maybe this was just a false memory? I'll explain with a true-life story. On New Year's Day in 2012, a 29-year-old man, Alpha Kabija, was cycling down a street in North London to go see his girlfriend and apologize to her for attending a New Year's Eve party without her. Unfortunately, Kabija would never make it to her house
Oh, you
because he
bastard.
would get knocked down by a van. Though Kabija's
Karma.
body only showed minor signs of injuries, Kabija wasn't wearing his helmet that day. So when University College London Hospital carried out a CT scan, they found that Kabija's brain was not only bleeding, but had actually shifted in his skull. To save his brain, the doctors would induce a coma so that the surgeons could remove some parts of his brain in order to reduce the swelling.
Oh, fuck.
Thankfully, the surgery was successful, and after 3 weeks, Kabija finally woke up from his coma. When Kabija came to, contrary to the doctor's expectations, he could remember everything about himself. In fact, he had even acquired some new memories. For instance, he recalled going to see his girlfriend, who was pregnant with their twins, the picture of the ultrasound he had put in his notebook, and the names they had agreed to give them, Sky and Nikita. Kabija also recalled cycling to the MI6 for a job interview with a man named Michael Mitchells, and even owning a private jet. The only issue was none of these things actually happened. So what's that about? Well, when most of us think of memory and remembering, we imagine that our brains store occurrences neatly like a video camera, and then pull out the necessary files when we need them. But that's not really how memories work. According to memory scientists, memories are more like mental constructions than tape recordings or books on a shelf. And autobiographical memories especially are very flexible, constructive, and reconstructive. For instance, a study published by Julia Shaw in Psychological Science in January 2015 showed that 70% of test subjects came to falsely believe that they had committed a serious crime as teenagers. And not just that, these subjects could even provide very vivid details of these non-events, all on the basis of 3 interviews in which Shaw employed suggestive memory retrieval techniques. As Shaw explains, a memory is a compressed, edited, and sometimes embellished version of an event, bolstered by the network of connections it makes in our brains. Memories that don't stick with us are ones that have fewer network connections. Later, when we retrieve the memory, the editing process continues as we shape the memory into a coherent story and form new network connections that serve new purposes. Its realness as a memory isn't a function of it corresponding to actual events as they occurred, but rather in what it means to the memory maker. Which means that our memories are more subjective than we like to think. But here's the thing. Sometimes this network of connections can become distorted. It happens on a smaller scale to people with healthy, uninjured brains, but happens on a much larger scale to people with brain injuries or brain trauma. Especially in the case of a coma or a loss of consciousness, the brain tries to make sense of the confusing time gap and then resorts to filling the gap with fictional memories. This is what happened with Kabija. With Kabija, the raw material for his fictional memories came from his subconscious. Before his accident, Kabija had a girlfriend, some of his friends were having kids, twins ran in his family, he once applied for a position at MI6 some years before his accident, and just recently, he had seen a movie that featured the plane he remembered owning. So, in other words, the building blocks for his fictional memories were in his head somewhere. His brain just had to find them and stack them on top of one another when it couldn't make sense of the time Kabija lost during his 3-week coma. For Dinok, before his coma, he had been interested in philosophy and the humanities. So long after the coma, when Dinok's brain couldn't explain the time gap, it probably just used these building blocks supplied by his subconscious to create memories of a utopian future, where everyone was spiritually inclined and heavily invested in philosophy. Well, that's definitely one way to look at it, but a more accurate way to look at this story is probably that the entire thing is just a work of fiction. Hear me out. There's this book called The Shadow Out of Time, written by H.P. Lovecraft in the 1930s, and some say that this book might have been the inspiration for the Paul Amadeus Dinok story. For instance, the protagonist of The Shadow Out of Time also slips into a coma and then wakes up in a different timeline. Well, he wakes up in the past while Dinok wakes up in the future, but it's still coma and time travel. Anyway, it's possible that, inspired by this story, George Papahatsis decided to write a narrative
Fuck, the
treatise
coma is some
on human
mystery
spirituality
stuff.
using time travel and romance as plot devices. A quick search on George Papahatsis reveals that he was an intellectual with deep interest in the humanities, and as you may have noticed, this was a major theme running throughout Dinok's recollection of his time in the future. So, it's possible that the Paul Amadeus Dinok story was just a work of fiction, not intended to be received as factual. Besides, the claim that Paul Amadeus Dinok lived in the town of Zurich in the 1920s and then taught in Athens in that same time period turns out to be shaky at best. Even at that time, both cities had records of people living and working in them, and neither has any record of a Paul Amadeus Dinok. In his book, George Papahatsis mentions that Dinok fought for Germany during World War I, after which he changed his name and moved to Switzerland. In other words, Paul Amadeus Dinok was probably not his real name, but this seems a little too convenient. Another thing that's a little too convenient is the fact that Dinok's original handwritten diary somehow got lost. According to Papahatsis, Greek military officials seized the diary from him when they raided his home and found that the diary was written in German. The problem, however, is that if this is true, then why doesn't Paul Amadeus Dinok exist? And why are there no German sources for the existence of this man, who is supposed to be Swiss? Instead, all the sources for Paul Amadeus Dinok are Greek and date back to the 60s rather than the 20s. Even the picture being passed around as the picture of Paul Amadeus Dinok is another hoax. It's actually a mugshot of a very photogenic criminal in New Zealand, Daniel Tohill, which destroys the last and final paper trail for this so-called Paul Amadeus Dinok. Honestly, this feels like the Princess Bride novel, which claims to be an abridged version of an older novel that doesn't actually exist. In fact, someone pointed
Princess
out
Bridge?
that prior to the book being published by
Looks like
George
Zoro.
Papahatsis in 1972, the basic plot of the book was laid out in a series of articles published in a Greek magazine called Parnassos, which means that the diary never existed. So that brings us to the million-dollar question. Is the Paul Amadeus Dinok story true or not? Well, I guess we'd have to wait until 3906 to find out. In the meantime, there are actually more convincing stories of time travel than that of Paul Amadeus Dinok. In 2006, a time traveler from the year 1958 appeared in Kiev, Ukraine, and this one brought tangible proof, including photos. Be sure to check it out.
Basically, you say it's not sure if it's real. We're gonna not see anything so much till 3900, because when we're gonna die, and like from now we need like 20 generations or something. Yeah, something. I mean, crazy. The stories was nice, everything. Just I don't really believe this, you know. It's just like no proving, no nothing. It's just, I don't know. No, not this. This one is not. What else we can see? What else we can watch? Could spend 500,000 to make a Minecraft mod. Why? To for the kids or what? I don't know. Some of those videos like so long, like Satan worshipping on Grammys. Diddy. The Diddy is crazy. I don't know. This one is good video. Every forbidden ritual explained. Well, I think I've watched it,
Necromancy. Necromancy, a word derived from the Greek words necros, meaning dead, and mantia, meaning divination, is a form of
I
magic.
don't remember if I saw this. I maybe fall asleep when I was watching.
Necromancy has been practiced throughout history in various cultures, with the aim of gaining hidden knowledge, foretelling the future, seeking counsel from deceased loved ones or ancestors, summoning spirits to exact revenge or place curses on enemies, or attempting to bring the dead back to life. This ancient practice, while often viewed with dread and suspicion, offers a fascinating window into humanity's attempts to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Necromancy's origins can be traced back to ancient civilizations.
So he's like
Greeks, Romans, Egyptians,
that
Babylonians.
old man
In
was
ancient
explaining
Greece,
everything.
necromancy was associated
Don't
with the cult of
explain it.
Hecate and was often performed in secluded, haunted locations like caves or graveyards. During the medieval period, necromancy was often conflated with witchcraft and demonology. The church condemned the practice as heretical and diabolic, leading to its practitioners being persecuted. Despite this, necromancy persisted in secret, evolving into a more structured and elaborate form of magic. Medieval necromancers, often learned scholars or clerics, would use grimoires, ancient magical texts containing rituals, spells, and invocations to summon and control spirits. Necromantic rituals are often conducted in places associated with death, such as graveyards, tombs, or abandoned ruins. These locations are believed to be closer to the spirit world. Practitioners use a variety of tools, including wands, swords, and talismans inscribed with protective symbols and invocations. These tools are believed to help control and protect against malevolent spirits as they recite specific
Never did that,
invocations
and
and
I don't
spells to
think I
summon
will
and
do it.
communicate with the dead. These words are often in Latin or other ancient languages, believed to have magical potency. Today, necromancy is largely a topic of fiction and fantasy, but it still has its adherents in various occult traditions. Modern necromancers may not practice the dark arts in the same way as their ancient counterparts, but they continue to explore the mysteries of life, death, and the afterlife, the Black Mass. This ritual is often depicted as an inversion or mockery of the traditional Christian Mass. The concept of the Black Mass began to take shape during the Middle Ages, a time of intense religious fervor and fear of heresy. The infamous French priest, Abbé Etienne Guibourg, is one of the earliest recorded figures associated with the Black Mass. In the 17th century, Guibourg allegedly performed these rites for Madame de Montespan, the mistress of King Louis XIV, in hopes of securing the king's continued favor. A Black Mass is typically conducted in a dark, secluded place, often at midnight. The altar might be anointed with unholy substances or even a naked woman, in stark contrast to the sacred altar in a church. The rituals involve the desecration of Christian symbols and prayers. The Holy Eucharist, if obtained, might be defiled in various sacrilegious ways like spitting on it, trampling, or even sexual acts. Black candles are lit beside an inverted cross, and the Mass is conducted by a defrocked priest or a self-proclaimed satanic priest who recites prayers backwards and invokes demons and demonic forces. It is seen as a means to gain supernatural power, often at the cost of one's soul. Historically, accusations of participating in or organizing a Black Mass could lead to severe punishments, including execution, especially during periods like the Inquisition and witch hunts. The Catholic Church has consistently condemned the Black Mass as a heinous act of sacrilege. Church authorities and secular governments alike have forbade such practices, viewing them as not only religiously offensive but also socially and morally dangerous. Modern satanic groups, such as the Church of Satan founded by Anton LaVey in 1966, have even distanced themselves from the traditional concept of the Black Mass. Goetia, a term derived from the Greek word goetia, meaning sorcery, is a form of magic that involves summoning and commanding spirits, particularly demons. This ancient practice, deeply embedded in the Western esoteric tradition, is both revered and feared for its power and complexity. Goetia is most famously associated with the 17th century grimoire known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, particularly its first section, the Ars Goetia, which lists 72 demons that can be summoned and controlled by the magician. The concept of summoning and commanding spirits can be found in the magical period of Hellenistic Egypt, where spells and incantations were used to invoke gods, demons, and spirits for various purposes. According to legend, King Solomon, renowned for his wisdom and mastery over spirits,
This
used
is
these
so
demons
deep.
to build the Temple of Jerusalem. The Ars Goetia purports to teach how to summon
This
these
is,
same
yeah, some
demons
mystery
using
and
a system of
no
sigils,
explain stuff.
incantations, and ritual tools. The ritual process typically involves the following steps. A protective circle with divine names is drawn, and a triangle nearby marks where the summoned demon will appear. Each demon in the Ars Goetia has a unique sigil, which the magician draws to focus the summoning. The magician recites a specific incantation, commanding the demon to appear within the triangle using divine authority. The magician negotiates with the demon, carefully considering the terms of any agreement. After the task is completed, the magician performs...
So what agreement we can make, like, what the demon can want, you know, like...
banishing rituals to safely dismiss the demon. Goetia is not a practice to be undertaken lightly. The implications of summoning and commanding demons are profound and potentially perilous. Practitioners of Goetia believe that improperly conducted rituals can lead to disastrous consequences, including physical harm, mental instability, or spiritual corruption. The summoned demon, if not properly controlled, might turn against the magician, wreaking havoc in its wake. Throughout history, Goetia has been practiced by a variety of individuals, from medieval magicians and alchemists to Renaissance scholars and occultists. Notable figures like Aleister Crowley and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, both prominent members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, studied and practiced Goetia, bringing it into the modern era of occultism. However, the practice of Goetia has always been fraught with danger, both from the spiritual forces involved and from the societal and religious condemnation it attracts. The Catholic Church and other Christian denominations have long forbidden the practice, viewing it as a grave sin and a gateway to damnation. The Rite of the Headless One. The Rite of the Headless One, also known as the Bornless Ritual, is one of the most enigmatic and powerful rituals in Western occultism. Its origins can be traced back to the Greek magical peri, a collection of ancient magical texts from Greco-Roman Egypt, dating from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century CE. The ritual is designed to invoke the Headless One, a mysterious and powerful entity or force that transcends ordinary human understanding. The ritual first appears in the Greek magical peri, where it is presented as an exorcism used to drive out evil spirits. Over time, the ritual has been reinterpreted and adapted by various occult traditions, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and Thelema, founded by Aleister Crowley. In these traditions, the Rite of the Headless One is often employed as an invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel, or the True Self, a concept central to Crowley's teachings. The ritual begins with the magician standing in a sacred space, often within a magic circle for protection. The magician then recites a powerful incantation, which calls upon the Headless One. The invocation includes several lines where the magician identifies themselves with the Headless One, declaring, "I am the Headless One," followed by a series of divine names and attributes. The text of the ritual can vary, but it often includes references to the light and the fire, suggesting the invocation of a divine force that transcends physical form. The magician asserts their authority over the spiritual realm, commanding spirits and entities to obey. The absence of a head implies a being that is not bound by the limitations of the human mind or ego, suggesting a connection to the divine or the infinite. By identifying with the Headless One, the magician seeks to transcend their ordinary self and connect with their higher, divine nature. In modern interpretations, particularly in Thelema, the
Who the
ritual
fuck is
seen as
this
a
guy
powerful
in
tool
middle?
for invoking the magician's true will
Why
and
he
aligning
looks
with their
so... He looks so strange, like an onion or something.
higher purpose. However,
That guy who painted this, he didn't even do his best, you know?
its association with magic, occultism, and the invocation of powerful forces has naturally placed it in opposition to orthodox religious institutions, particularly within Christianity, categorizing them as heretical, blasphemous, or even demonic. The voodoo doll ritual. This is a symbolic practice associated with voodoo, a religion with roots in West African spirituality and Haitian culture. Contrary to popular belief, the voodoo doll is not inherently malevolent. The doll, often made from cloth, wax, or other materials, is used as a focus for directing spiritual energy towards a specific person. Pins or other objects may be inserted into the doll at various points, corresponding to the area of life or the body the practitioner wishes to influence, be it for healing, protection, love, or, in some cases, harm. The ritual involves invoking spirits, known as loa in voodoo, to channel energy through the doll, often accompanied by prayers, offerings, and other ceremonial acts. The doll acts as a physical representation of the person it is intended to affect, allowing the practitioner to target their intentions more precisely. While the voodoo doll has
Does
been
this guy
sensationalized in popular culture
paint
as a tool
himself
for
with
curses,
sword?
in traditional practice, it is just as often used for positive purposes. Voodoo as a whole has often been demonized by Western cultures. During the colonial era, European colonizers often suppressed African-derived spiritual practices as a means of controlling enslaved populations and erasing their cultural identities. The Witches' Sabbath. This is a gathering of witches, believed to be a secret nocturnal meeting where witches worship the devil, perform dark rituals, and engage in various forms of sorcery. This concept, popularized during the European witch hunts of the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, often depicted the Sabbath as a blasphemous inversion of Christian practices. At these gatherings, witches were thought to cast spells, brew potions, and participate in rituals involving dancing, feasting, and sometimes sexual orgies, all under the direction of the devil, who appeared in various forms. The Witches' Sabbath became a central theme in witch trials, with accusations often based on the belief that individuals had attended these gatherings. Although, in reality, the Witches' Sabbath was more of a myth than a reflection of actual practices, fueled by religious and social fears, and used to justify the persecution of those accused of witchcraft. Chaos magic sigils. Chaos magic, a modern form of occult practice, is a system that emphasizes the use of belief as a tool for achieving one's desires, rather than adhering to any specific dogma or tradition. One of the most distinctive and widely used techniques in chaos magic is the creation and use of sigils. These are symbols crafted from a specific intent, designed to bypass the conscious mind and implant a desire deep within the unconscious, where it is believed to manifest into reality. The concept of the sigil, as it is known in chaos magic, was developed by the British artist and occultist Austin Osman Spare in the early 20th century. Spare was an eccentric figure, steeped in both the artistic and esoteric circles of his time. His work diverged sharply from the more structured ceremonial magic of figures like Aleister Crowley, focusing instead on the power of the subconscious and personal belief. Spare's method involved taking a statement of intent, such as "I will find success," and breaking it down into its constituent letters. These letters would then be artistically combined and abstracted into a unique symbol, the sigil, which encapsulates the desire without being overtly recognizable as language. This sigil, once created, is charged with energy through concentration or ritual, then fired into the unconscious mind, often by being forgotten or destroyed. Spare believed that the conscious mind's direct involvement in manifesting desires was often a hindrance, and by bypassing it, the sigil could work more effectively. Sigil magic, like other forms of chaos magic, is often considered forbidden by mainstream religious traditions because it involves manipulating reality through personal will, bypassing traditional religious structures and divine authority. It's seen as a form of sorcery or witchcraft, which many religions condemn as dangerous and spiritually corrupting. Additionally, the emphasis on self-directed power and the lack of adherence to established moral or ethical guidelines often associated with chaos magic can lead to concerns about its potential misuse, further contributing to its taboo status. The Baphomet Ceremony. The Baphomet Ceremony is a ritual associated with various occult traditions, particularly within modern Satanism and
This
some
one is
branches of
mad,
esoteric
maybe.
Freemasonry. Baphomet is a symbolic figure, often depicted as a goat-headed, winged being with both male and female attributes, representing the union of opposites such as good and evil, male and female, and spiritual and material. The ceremony itself typically involves invoking Baphomet as a representation of balance, enlightenment, and the pursuit of knowledge. Rituals may include the recitation of specific invocations, symbolic gestures, and the use of ritual objects such as candles, sigils, or altars dedicated to Baphomet. Participants might meditate on the figure of Baphomet to achieve personal transformation or spiritual insight. While the Baphomet symbol has often been associated with Satanism and misunderstood as a purely evil entity, in many esoteric traditions, it represents deeper metaphysical principles rather than literal devil worship. This has led to its controversial and forbidden status in mainstream religious contexts, where it is often condemned as blasphemous or heretical.
Kinda cool. So much of he is explaining here. Occult symbol explained. Paranormal communication. Yeah, this is kinda cool.
Spirit writing.
I go to toilet.
This is also known as psychography. It is a paranormal communication method where a person writes without consciously controlling their hand. The belief is that a spirit or otherworldly entity takes control of the writer's hand to convey messages. Practitioners view this as a way to tap into the spirit world or the subconscious mind, allowing information to flow through them that they wouldn't consciously produce. The process involves a person entering a relaxed or meditative state, often referred to as a trance, where they clear their mind of conscious thoughts. In this state, they hold a pen or sit at a keyboard and allow their hand to move freely. Instead of thinking about what they are writing, the practitioner lets the hand move without interference, believing that an external force is guiding the movement. Without consciously thinking, the writer lets their hand move, allowing the pen to form letters, words, and sentences. The writing may start as scribbles or illegible symbols before coherent messages start to form. Automatic writing has been practiced in various cultures and is closely associated with the rise of spiritualism in the 19th and early 20th centuries. One of the most famous proponents of automatic writing was Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, who claimed to channel messages from ascended masters through writing. In Eastern spiritual traditions, automatic writing or similar practices have been linked to channeling messages from gods, spirits, or the subconscious mind during deep meditation. Despite skepticism, automatic writing remains a popular tool among mediums, psychics, and spiritualists who view it as a powerful way to receive divine guidance, communicate with the deceased, or tap into hidden knowledge. While many people use automatic writing with positive intent, some practitioners warn against the possibility of encountering malevolent spirits or forces. It's believed that one must be cautious about the entities they invite to communicate, as not all may have benevolent intentions. Psychometry. This is a paranormal practice in which an individual, typically a psychic or medium, claims to gain information about a person, place, or event by physically touching an object associated with that entity. The idea is that objects can hold the energetic imprints or memories of their owners or experiences, and a sensitive individual can tap into this energy to uncover hidden knowledge or past events. The concept of psychometry has its roots in the 19th century and is often credited to American professor Joseph Rhodes Buchanan, who coined the term in 1842. Buchanan believed that all...
What's that?
Randonautica is an app that uses a random number generator and location settings to create coordinates for users to explore in their local areas. The app was released in February 2020
that's
and
kinda
became
cool.
especially popular during the COVID lockdowns. People would often document their findings through video and post them online. Sometimes people find downright creepy things or places, or even find themselves at the scene of a crime. A viewer named David sent me this first story and footage. It was August of 2020. The weather had been good, and so he and a friend decided to use and Nautica out of boredom. They generated 4 anomalies in total, since the first 3 were in someone's backyard or inaccessible locations. In the app, anomalies are points that can be either attractors or voids. Attractors are clusters of random points that are very dense, while voids are clusters with a very low density. The 4th anomaly looked promising, and so the 2 friends drove there. You can see on the screen the street they drove down, followed by the small path they went down after parking. The anomaly had a radius of 470 meters, so it was a fairly big area, but they didn't have to look around for long before making a bizarre and honestly creepy discovery. This is a photograph of the path they walked down, and as they walked down, they stumbled across a note stuck through a stick. On the outside of it, it read, "Write down your cell phone number." When folded open, it read, "I can give you a cell phone number or even an email address. Give me your mail address and I will send you it," with what it is referring to remaining unclear.
So you can see, first of all, it says write down your cell phone number. When you fold it open, ich kann dir eine Handynummer geben oder sogar eine E-Mail-Adresse. Gib mir eine Mailadresse und ich sende es dir. So it says somewhere along the lines, I can give you a cell phone number or even an email address.
I don't know,
Give
this
me an email
fucking
address
bullshit. Scary Red Knife. It's some niche where I never saw Randonautica. Oh, my video. Moses Sterling Wikipedia. I don't know, this is... Okay. Who is that? What the fuck? Fuck those trolls, like people can, whatever we do, all the time there is a trolls. Yeah, his channel. Oh shit. Fuck this guy. It's the Lithuanian clown. Become her obsession. Fuck. I don't watch his videos, it's just I don't know why it shows. Awareness. Why is that? Okay. He's been living like an animal. What does he mean? Hidden dangers of NoFap. There is lots of bullshit. Well, yeah, there is content, you know. Okay, for now enough.